fun when you don't know what you're going to talk about.
Yeah, this is the ritual. This is the Badu incense that's going to bless the space.
I'm excited to smell it.
There's above ground incense too. All right. Thank you for being here to join us for the DoubleBlind Medicine Music Series. How are you feeling today?
I feel wonderful, thank you. How are you?
Good. You good? Okay.
Ooh, delicious. Well done.
Very well done.
Yeah.
Right?
I'll have to try and get some.
Good luck.
Good luck, yeah.
Okay. My first question to you is, when was it first apparent that music, songwriting, singing, performing was a part of your purpose?
Ooh. I think to attribute a term as weighted as purpose to it, that feeling came a little bit later. We started the band when we were 15 years old. We were in 10th grade. It was Michael Einziger, Jose Pasillas, and myself. And I had known Jose since 4th grade, and I'd known Michael since 6th grade. And so we had a common bond around surfing and skating and drawing. And then we started going to concerts around, so before that period of time, my first show, as we were just discussing, I think I was 13. And my older sister took me and my older brother down to San Diego to see Bon Jovi and Skid Row. And it definitely had an effect on me, so I discovered that I liked going to concerts. By the time I was about 15, so the same year that we started the band, I would go with Michael and Jose to local shows here in Los Angeles. And I started to just sort of study what these musicians, these artists were doing without actually knowing that's what I was doing. I was just clocking how they were doing it, and I started to clock how they would arrange songs together. And this is before we started writing songs, and it just looked fun. It looked like they were having the best time. And then I would look around me and I would see that everybody else seemed to be having a phenomenal time. So it was sort of a natural progression in our friendship to do this. So back to your question, it began as just, this is so much fun. We were just kids, and it began, the impetus to put the band together was that we had a project in a literature class. We had to either compose an original poem or an original song and present it to the class in the form of a reading or a performance or videotapes. We put it on videotape. And then so that necessitated a name for our little band that we rewrote 2 songs. And so that's how we came up with the band name. But as far as, I'm rambling a little bit, I apologize.
I love it.
Okay. As far as purpose and my purpose, that kind of came, I would say, closer to around maybe age 20. I remember feeling when I was 20 or 21 that this was not only my favorite thing to do, was to write music and to perform music with my closest friends, but it also started to become, for lack of a better way of describing it, almost like a sense-making apparatus. It became a lens through which I could observe my experience here and interpret it. So by writing, I was able to externalize sort of emotional, intellectual, spiritual experiences and then read them back and get a better understanding. And then we would perform them, we would sing them out and give it everything that we had. And then people started to react to that. So in a way, it started helping me make sense of my experience. So I suppose purpose arrived soon thereafter.
20.
Around that, yeah.
Wow, so you had already been performing for years.
We'd already been a band for about 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. What's been the most exciting moment of your career?
Oh.
The peak. What's been the peak?
That's a really hard question to answer because it's such a strange thing. my knee-jerk reaction was to say 3 days ago when we were on stage.
Okay.
But that's how I feel almost every time we go on stage, where there's this the experience of hyper presence, where you are so in your body and you're so in the moment, and to the point where you it's actually hard to describe, as I'm sure you can tell by my struggle to describe it. So it's almost every time we go out and perform, there you don't know what's going to happen. You know the material, you know how it's supposed to go, but there are always extenuating circumstances. There's never not circumstances that are thrown into the mix on a daily basis. So sometimes those things are good, sometimes they enhance, sometimes they're chaos factors that detract from the potential of the experience. So you're forced to interpret constantly, like moment to moment, you're interpreting the experience. And so when it goes well, which fortunately, knock wood, is most of the time, it's like, this is the best day of my life. So that's my answer.
Right? I love it. It's like the reminder of that purpose, you know?
Yeah,
it's like you first realizing your purpose and then it being, validated or affirmed, like constantly. I guess my question around that is like, the peak of your life or the peak of your music career is connected to that. It's like a full circle, where it comes back. So
it also speaks to this idea that we have, I would say culturally, because I've only lived, we've traveled all over the world, but I've only lived here in America. So let's call it like the West. There's a cultural experience that holds the idea of making it very high as like sort of the highest value. And it's such a nebulous term, such a not clearly defined idea, the idea of making it. It's like, what does that mean? To so many people, it means you're rich, or your career is going well, or you bought a house, or whatever that looks like. I'm sure if you asked 100 people, you get 100 different answers. I've always been suspicious of the concept of making it. And so as a result, I don't think I've ever made it. And it's made me think about that concept enough so that I actually have decided that I don't want to make it. I'm in love with the process. I love the process. So if like making it means that the dance stops, like fuck that. I love being in the process of making music, performing music, painting, conversation. To me, it's all part of that bigger picture. So like, you'll know when I've made it, when I'm just like, okay, I'm good, bye.
That's true. You did make it, and you get to keep going.
Hopefully.
Right? You do.
So.
Everybody loves you and your music, and I think you've inspired a lot of people all over the world.
That's very nice of you. Thank you.
That's very special. Really special. I'm curious, when did you have your first spiritual awakening?
I actually don't know specifically what the first time was. I do remember being a little kid. My family has had its ups and downs over the years, but one thing that we did right was that we sat down for dinner together almost every night when I was a kid, around like this beautiful long wooden table. And I remember sitting at the one side of the table, and almost every night from the time I was like, I want to say maybe 7 or 8 years old, I would have what could be described as like continuous out-of-body experiences. I would be in dinner with my family and having conversations with my family, and I remember feeling like I could play with it. Everything would get further away, and then I could pull it back in. And then I remember at one point I started getting really good at it, and I could look down on the top of my head. And so whatever that means, you could interpret it lots of different ways. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe my mom's broccoli had some kind of, she sprinkled some like extra special stuff, who knows? But I remember having that experience, and then the older I got, the more I would sort of look at it objectively to the best of my ability, like what was that and what is this? And then as a young teenager into my teenage years, I would play with that, and I would play with it in dream time as well. So it's a little bit fuzzy as to what my first real experience what that was, because it was, I'm still in a kind of a process, once again, of understanding all of it. But those key experiences started happening very, very young. But I've always had a very healthy dream time. A lot of music comes from there. A lot of music
after?
And journaling, but the advent of like recording devices, even like the early rudimentary ones, well, for me, growing up in the late 70s and in the 80s, so like tape recorders. I have just tons and tons and tons of them that I'd go back to. And I was like humming melodies that I would pull out of that kind of fuzzy in-between area between dream time and waking. I learned to kind of hover there. And it was sort of like a quasi-lucid space. So I don't know if you can call that spiritual, but I suppose however you individually decide to interpret that could be considered part of a spiritual process, I suppose. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
And everybody has a different interpretation.
Yeah,
That's what's beautiful about the world,
Yeah.
right? Is we all have a different way of describing what spirituality is, or what it means to be connected, or what it means to disconnect or disassociate, right? And I've actually talked to a lot of people that have had those kinds of experiences of like the lens, or the or the view, the like higher power, maybe God view. I've had that too.
But also
strange.
the I suppose most importantly, the acknowledgement of the observer in the equation, and the observer being part of you, but something separate than your sort of like internalized bodily experience there. And that's what's so wonderful about like coming into like a meditation space. And I've been experimenting with different meditation techniques since I was a teenager, but settled more on one over the last 10 or 12 years that's been much more sort of applicable on a day-to-day basis. And there's this amazing experience, as I'm sure most of your readers and viewers can attest to, because I have a feeling that there's a lot of meditators in your field, but it's that idea of there's the experiencer and then there's the observer. You're in a meditative state and you have no thoughts, but then there's a part of you that's understanding and realizing objectively that you're not thinking. Does that make sense? Yeah.
It's so bizarre.
And so what's that?
Right.
That's what's super curious about the experience. It's like, what is that awareness that's looking in on the experience? So
I don't know.
neither do I, but that's what's deliciously fun about it.
What was your first plant medicine?
Cannabis.
Same. Pretty common.
Yeah, especially growing up here in Southern California.
Everywhere.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And then what?
Then it was psilocybin.
Same.
It's interesting too that mushrooms are they considered plant medicine, even though mushrooms aren't technically plants? They're their own
I call
thing.
them that.
Yeah, I do too, but it just occurred to me like in the past couple of days, like, why do we call them plant medicine?
Same. Somebody said that, where they only referred to maybe something like ayahuasca as plant medicine, and I'm like,
They do fit quite nicely from a semantic point of view.
They are in their own category, I think. They deserve their own little spot, because they're like their own community.
Yeah. Well, they are, scientifically speaking, like observed as their own category of
Yes.
the fungi kingdom, fungi.
But I put them in there though, because I felt that it was a nice gradual, like we start with cannabis, we go to psilocybin, maybe we go into some longer trips, you know. Was it a gradual thing for you?
Relatively speaking, I went from I was in the DARE generation and the Just Say No thing, like
That was scary.
Reagan stuff. And I remember even like I think I was in 4th grade, maybe 5th grade, and they picked me to like act out some of the skits. Like the DARE people would come to the school and be like, you and you and you're gonna do this role, and you're gonna be the drug dealer, and you're gonna be the kid that says, no, I'm not gonna do that. And I remember I was like, cool, great. I was like, no. And so I had a very distinct sort of propagandized impression of drugs writ large. Obviously, it was a limited propagandized understanding of drugs and drug culture. But when I was 15, it was the same year we started the band. I tried cannabis, and I got really lucky for my first experience. I was with my older brother and my girlfriend at the time. And my older brother came into this strain of ganja called Alaskan Thunderfuck. Have you ever heard of it? It was like the strongest indica that existed at that point. And so Southern California was sort of just like, it was mostly just like crappy weed, you know? And then
Sounds nice though.
There was this one called Alaskan Thunderfuck, and I don't know why it got that name. I don't know if it actually came from Alaska, but my brother was hesitant to like get me stoned with him, but then the girl that I was dating was a couple years older than me, and she was like, we're all here together, it'll be fine. And I had like a full-blown psychedelic experience the very first time. So it agreed with me in a lot of ways. And I was slow to adopt it, but then I got super into it through high school. And then we'd started our band, and it was a really interesting sort of accompaniment to writing music with my friends. And I think maybe I don't remember how old I was the first time I took psilocybin though. It was maybe a year later, year and a half. But that was also we didn't know about microdosing back then.
Nobody did.
Yeah, it was like, how much do you eat? Everyone was like, I don't know, eat
Go
the whole
for it.
bag. So it became kind of common practice to eat 1/8 of an ounce.
But it was good vibes. I never had a bad experience.
It was unfucking believable.
Yeah.
And what was interesting too is we always had we didn't know about set and setting back then, but we had intimations, probably because of our experiences with just like cannabis, where it was like, there are better places to get stoned than other places. Like you don't like go and smoke a joint in the parking lot of the police station, or a lot of people love doing it at school, but it was like, that just seems stupid. It's like a waste of a high. We would like go to the forest. We would go towards bodies of water. We would go to the desert. And so all of my early psychedelic experiences were in these incredibly beautiful, relatively safe places, and wonderful things abounded as a result, you know?
Yeah, same. Did you get into any hard drugs when you were younger?
No. There was a very, very distinct demarcation line between what people were taking. Growing up here in San Fernando Valley, there was no shortage of access to literally any drug that you could think of. So I had friends that got lost with crack. I had friends that got lost on PCP, different methamphetamines. And you could, once again, in that observing spirit, like we were talking about earlier, if I have any talent at all, it's a talent for reading the room. And I would watch what happened when people would smoke cannabis, or they would take mushrooms, or if they smoked crack, or if they did a line of blow, or if they sprinkled angel dust onto their pot and their pipe. And so I knew exactly what to stay away from. And I had some close friends that got really lost, and I had quite a few friends like die as a result of interactions with bad substances, what I consider bad substances. And so still to this day, I've never tried cocaine, I've never smoked crack, I have no interest.
Good for you.
Yeah, they carry with them very particular energies, and so I suppose I'm sensitive to particular kinds of energies, and there are some that I'm just not really interested in.
That's very impressive.
Yeah, especially being in rock and roll.
Totally. I'm just like, what?
But I never even really enjoyed alcohol.
That's probably what it is.
Yeah. So it's amazing still to this day. Like we're on tour right now, and it's easier to get a beer than it is to get water. And it just boggles my mind. And it doesn't matter how much you'd be like, hey, can we get more water and less beer? There's always going to be more beer. It's as if the environment is trying to point you in that direction. So, yeah.
That's great. You're a very healthy example.
Hope so.
Yeah. Well, you learn a lot along the way, being a musician and just observing, and having your own experience to find what works for you. You need to keep your health in order, to be able to continue doing what you love, and it's very sad, I think, to see people who lose that sense of value in their life because of the rock star life, taking over and having so much fun. That
There's also something to be said for acknowledging that a lot of people that get involved in the arts are sensitive types. Like creative types are sensitive types, and sensitive types tend to have a history of trauma of some kind, familial trauma, interrelational trauma. And so much of the time, like leaning into creativity, it's like a refuge of some kind, if only like a spiritual or emotional refuge from what you're, trying to get away from. And so people that get addicted to more, I suppose, addictive substances, whether it's alcohol or cocaine, I understand that so many of them, if not all of them, once they get lost in it, they're medicating. They're trying to dampen some kind of a hurt. So it's not for a lack of understanding. It's just, I get why people get lost down those roads,
Yeah, same.
I just tried to be very mindful, just in my own experience. Once again, observing like what these substances do. And they're relatively predictable at a certain point. So it's like, do I want to go down that road? I'm like, most of the time I'm like, yeah, no. How many times has that story been sort of told? How many times has it been laid out before me,
A lot. Besides meditation, what are your spiritual practices?
I would say that probably the most consistent spiritual practice, besides meditation, like a daily meditation, it's very simple. It's just 20 minutes every day. I got turned on to tea, drinking tea. And not like a Lipton's in a bag doing this and hugging the warm mug and looking out the window and going, on a foggy day. Not like that, though that is probably a wonderful spiritual practice for some people. My former partner, who you know, she became fully enamored of Cha Dao, way of tea. And there was a tea teacher that came from Taiwan into Venice where we lived, and he started doing courses. And so I went a couple of times just because it sounded intriguing, and I would just drink tea in silence with these new friends, and it was delicious. That was like the entry point. I was like, whoa, I've never had tea like this before. And so it's like aged, hand-picked, hand-cured tea from China. It's very specific. And so my former partner just got completely swept up into it in the most beautiful way, and she studied, and she would go to China to study, and studied with the tea master in Taiwan, and it's kind of like what she does still to this day, this tea practice. But I ended up adopting it, if anything, by proxy, I suppose, and I've been doing it now for over a decade. I bring it on tour with me. I'm home every afternoon. I sit down and I drink tea. And it's a lovely accompaniment to meditation, but sometimes I read, sometimes I paint tiny pictures. But you could also not necessarily call it a spiritual practice. I am at a point in my life, and I have been for some time, where I am not putting as much stress on what some people might call, heavy quotes, like a spiritual practice. I've come to a point where the whole thing is a spiritual practice. Like everything, driving, shaving, shitting, eating, making love, fighting, gardening, being on tour, all of it is part of this huge process that we're in the process of not only experiencing, but attempting to understand. And so how is that not a spiritual practice? You know what I mean?
I do.
So, yeah.
That's mine too.
Good.
It's like reaping the lessons and the awareness from every single experience.
Yeah.
That's it.
And there's something miraculous that happens, for me at least, and maybe you tell me what you think about this, but like as a result of that little tweak in the perceptual framework, makes everything a little bit more miraculous. And I'm drifting into religious language, not only for lack of better terms, but because it ends up being kind of appropriate. Like once you start to see everything through that lens, it's like the greens are greener, Sun, you're like, whoa, what an amazing, wow. Like you just start noticing things differently. And it's a lot more fun, I have to say. Yeah. Have you found that?
Yeah, but not consistently.
Yeah.
You know, I just think there's with performance. You know, that's what I was going to ask is what, like, if you have any rituals before performance or after, before shows, is there anything, I mean, besides tea?
I wouldn't call them rituals. I'd say they're more
Anything that you have to do?
practices. No. There are things I like to do. But
Or
if
to prepare?
Yeah.
Prepare vocally?
Yeah, I like
Anything?
to warm up.
Okay, you do warm-ups, exercises?
I just do some exercises for maybe an hour before we go on stage.
Whole hour, great.
Just so I'm a little bit more prepared for the ask. It's quite the songs that we've written over the years, and you know, we've written quite a lot of albums and written a lot of songs now. For whatever reason, when we're writing, every single time I'm like, let's see how hard I can make this for myself. I don't know why I do that, but I get very adventurous, like when we get in the studio and I'm constantly trying to challenge myself. And so we go out on tour and we perform these songs, and I literally have to learn how to perform the songs on a nightly basis. So when I say it's a big ask, it's like, it's from a physiological point of view.
Yeah.
It's asking a lot of my body. So it makes sense to like stretch.
Yeah, and
before you lift the heavy
have
weight.
you noticed your range change a lot over the years?
Yeah. When we first started, the band, we were 15, I did not know how to sing. I just knew how to project my voice. I could sort of bark loudly. And it was necessary because, we were just in a garage or in a living room or something, and the drums were always the loudest thing. And so the bass and the guitar were trying to turn up to try and match the volume of the acoustic drums. And then we started miking the drums, so they were turning up even more. And this is before we had like in-ears where we could hear what we were doing precisely. And so I had to learn how to just project over it. Even when you're mic'd, it's still hard to project over those things. So learning how to sing came after actually being in a band. It was like many years in that I actually kind of figured out, it's more interesting, it's more challenging, but it's more interesting, and maybe it lasts longer if I actually create like a melody, you know? What was the question?
Ritual before
right.
or after? So the warming up, exercises, and then any kind of ritual after? Anything you do for yourself?
I just have something to eat, and then I usually go to bed, which is an amazing ritual.
Yes, it is. I haven't learned it yet.
Life's still too exciting. You're like,
it is. We're still, there's still things I'm reaching for. So, you can rest now. You've given enough, of your time and energy.
It's energetically, like I said, it's a big energetic ask, and you put out a lot, but then you're receiving a lot too.
Yeah.
So after we do a concert, I sleep like a baby. It's just like, you've given everything.
Have you raised a baby?
No.
They don't sleep like that.
I know. Where does that term come from?
Don't know. But I've always thought about it. I've been like,
why won't you sleep like a baby?
Babies wake up a lot.
Yeah.
Actually.
You sleep like a rock star? Is that maybe a thing?
Yeah.
Okay. Like, but they don't usually sleep either, so.
Or like a rock, I thought you were going to say.
Rocks sleep very well. Give them enough time, though, they eventually make people. You ever hear that old Alan Watts terminology? He's like, those planets we're exploring, it's just rocks. Be careful. Where there are rocks, there will, those things, I'm paraphrasing or butchering the quote, but he's like, those things will start moving around eventually. Like Earth is a perfect example. It used to just be a clump of inert matter, and now look at us, We can't agree on anything,
I don't read enough. I need to do that.
He's a good one to dive into if you haven't.
I have not. I dive into music. That's what I do. Not enough books, but I'll get there.
You have time.
When things slow down, I know. Have you been to the jungle yet to drink ayahuasca?
You mean literally the jungle?
Yes.
Okay, no, I haven't. Okay. I've been to the jungles of Topanga, where I had my first ayahuasca experience.
Peru.
Well, I've heard all
Brazil.
about it. Yeah.
Have you never felt called to go?
I've definitely felt called. I approached ayahuasca with a sort of a relative caution, because I had this sense that it was not like other plant medicines. And I was right. But we can talk about this as much as you'd like. My experience with it, I've had one experience, and it was supposed to be a double nighter. And after the first night, I went home to take a nap, and I slept for like 20 hours.
They let you leave?
Yeah, because I was right down the street. But it was here in the valley. But it was a Brazilian ayahuasca shaman that came to visit the person who was hosting that night. He happened to be a famous Brazilian jazz musician too. So he was a musician / ayahuasquero. Is that the term?
Yeah. Did he? So he knew who you were?
No.
Really?
No, he didn't even speak
He just
English.
let you go home?
Yeah.
Usually they don't let you do that.
Really?
You know? Really?
I will tell you
It's
though.
a container. It's like, here's what the space we're creating together. We're having this experience. People aren't supposed to leave. Yeah.
Interesting. So there were some rule breakers there.
Yep.
Maybe I was the rule breaker. I don't know. I don't know how other ayahuasca experiences go, but there was when we, lined up to take the medicine, like he was pouring individual cups and then handing. And once again, in that observational space, I was really clocking the room. I'm looking around, and I was watching as well how he would pour, and he would look at the people, and he would like look at them and then smile and then pour, and then he was pouring less for some people and more for others. And by the time I got to him, I just smiled at him, and he looked at me, and he looked at me up and down, and then he kept eye contact, and he poured, and the cup was just bubbling over. And he just held eye contact, and I was like, wow, what does this mean? I think I'm in for it. But it was probably the most profound
So you had a full cup.
experience. Yes.
Were you like, bro, can you bring that down a little bit?
No, I was in full, I went into the experience with full surrender. I was ready to fully surrender to it. And I think that,
And that was the first night, you said.
yeah.
Then you went home.
Then I went home. I was supposed to go back for the second night, and I woke up the next day. It was I guess I needed the sleep. I don't know. Yeah. It was
They weren't worried about you?
well, I was with my partner.
Okay.
So that she.
I'm just like putting this together.
Where's Brandon?
Right? I'm just like, is he okay? You know, you usually don't send somebody home after giving them a cup full of ayahuasca.
Well, this was after.
It was after.
It was the next day.
Got it.
Yeah, because obviously it went through the night.
Yeah.
But
Okay. Got
what
it.
was your first experience like?
Not like that.
Yeah. Where were you? Were you like in the jungle?
Oh no, I was in the Hollywood Hills overlooking the whole city, like looking at like the clouds turn into skulls. Like, what is this about?
Yeah. Isn't it wild that there's such access to such important and powerful compounds here in Los Angeles, in like California?
I never wanted to be here for it. I wanted to be in the jungle, and it just didn't happen.
Right.
But I was in such a place, I think emotionally was suffering so much that I was willing to do anything to not feel that way anymore.
Sure.
So I just said yes, and mostly got invited in for the music because, as you may have found out, music is a big foundational piece of this medicine, and the songs that have come through ayahuasca to the people are incredibly beautiful. The translation is gorgeous, and so I fell in love with the music, you know.
I fell in love with it too. I was blown away, but they were performing it live in the room, and there were multiple singers who were doing these crazy harmonies during the experience. But I had a hilarious experience before it went into sort of like the deep dive. It was just, there's a window of time where you're just sort of like high, like you're just really high, but you're still kind of like there, and you're like, wow, I'm really high right now. Maybe I've never been this high. And there were songbooks they were passing around, but they're all in Portuguese.
Oh.
And all of the music they were singing was in Portuguese. It was beautiful. It was like deeply intricate and psychedelic, and all acoustic instruments, acoustic voices, the whole thing. And at one point, about an hour into the experience, I spoke Portuguese. I'm not exaggerating. I was reading it, and I was like, this is so wild. Once again, in that observer state, why do I understand the lyrics right now? And I was singing like I already knew the songs. And I stopped, and I laughed for probably 20 minutes straight. I was like, this is so cool. I speak Portuguese. Before that, I was like, obrigado, obrigada, tudo bem. Like I knew like 2 or 3 things from traveling in Brazil or Portugal, which, different obviously, but I laughed so hard at the realization for that like 20 minutes that I spoke Portuguese, and then it went away. So, but there's an interesting thing there in these sort of compounds and the access that is provided and the windows of opportunity and things that can come through, you know.
The visions.
Mm-hmm.
Any visions that you'll never forget?
It was a whole night. I've been unfolding it and trying to make sense of it ever since. And this is like probably 12 years ago.
Wow, and you've never felt called to go back?
I've felt called a lot of times to go back, but I've approached these plant medicines with maybe I've erred on the side of I've always erred on the side of respect and with a relative caution. I've never had a bad experience. And there was a period of time in my 20s when I was taking mushrooms and LSD a lot.
Same time?
No. Like it would be one or the other. So lots and lots of experiences during that period of time, formative experiences, you could say. I learned that in those periods of time that I was relatively psychologically and spiritually robust, that I would take some of the same compounds with friends and I'd have a completely different experience, you know what I mean? And you also learn that there are some people that shouldn't take these compounds. But I wanted to approach them with, number one, a base layer of respect, because they can turn on you just as easily as they can like give you access to the unified field or God or whatever you want to call it. If you approach them with a little bit too much, I don't know what the right term is, a little too self-assured, something happens where they can sort of flip on you. And who's to say whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing? Sometimes we need to be kind of like, you know.
Shaken up a little bit.
Straighten up, exactly.
Well, that's what they say ayahuasca does, because she's the grandmother, right? Like she'll show you the things you don't want to see, and she'll tell you to do things you might not want to do, right? But ultimately it's for the highest good, right? She's like there to guide you and protect you because she loves and cares about you, kind of thing. So I have to give myself that warm feeling, like it's a warm hug, you know, instead of this like, why the fuck do I have to see that? I don't want to do that thing. I don't want to go back there. I don't want to, you know, that resistance that comes up, but ultimately it comes back to love. That's
so true.
That's what I love about it. You know, I'm just in love with the music.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear you sing in Portuguese.
It's in there somewhere.
Let's go back.
Right? It's going to be funny because it's probably broken Portuguese, but I'm not kidding. It was like I looked at my partner who I was sitting. The room was sort of men on one side, women on the other side, but we sat where she was right here with me, and so there were moments through the night where we were holding hands, and I looked at her at one point, and I was like. And I started singing in Portuguese without looking, like I just knew the song. And then she was like, it kind of like shocked her. And then I started laughing, and then she started laughing. You know how that works, that even in the most sober states, the laughing fit can take over.
Usually they don't let couples sit beside each other either.
Really? So they were breaking all the rules.
All the rules. It depends on it depends on their traditions. It depends on the tribe. The Shipibo, you are in your own lane. There is no talking. There is no singing unless, you know, there's that invitation. It's complete darkness.
Interesting.
Complete darkness.
It was dark in this sort of like, it was a dedicated ayahuasca space, but my experience with it at least was so internal that I could have been alone. I think there was maybe 25 or 30 people in the space that night, which I was a little bit, I didn't love that idea of,
That's a lot.
You know what I mean? But then once the medicine started to do its thing, it didn't matter. There could have been 100 people there. I wouldn't have known. Like it was such an internal
That's beautiful.
experience.
No ego then.
I suppose.
That's
yeah.
great.
It's also interesting that something you brought up with, did you say grandmother?
Yeah.
Yes. So I didn't know anything about, I'd read a lot about psilocybin and collective cultural experiences around psilocybin and also around like mescaline. And the first time I took psilocybin was, once again, we were talking about the heroic dose. So I took like a heroic dose without realizing it was a heroic dose. But about 3 hours into the experience, I saw a little green man mescalero, I think it's referred to in some of the traditions. And it was like a little leafy creature. Yeah, you saw it too, didn't you? Look, he has it in his mouth. Oh, that's bear, sorry.
Oh,
Anyway,
nobody needs.
I didn't know, I didn't have any of the lore around ayahuasca in my mind going into the experience, but it was decidedly feminine, and it was older than I could conceive of. So it had like a grandmother, great grandmother thing. Mm-hmm. And so I just went with it. And I'll say she loved that. Mm. She loved that I recognized that quickly. Mm-hmm. And the experience was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. I can't, it's, as you know, it's very hard to describe. Mm-hmm. But it was a wonderful time.
There's people who say, that I know personally, who sit with ayahuasca often, mm-hmm. that she does reveal herself. And she shows her face, and there's been some artists that I've actually painted or drew, you know,
oh, wow.
this figure, you know, because you have to imagine that every plant medicine kind of has an embodiment in some way, you know, depending on like how we feel, the visions we see, the messages we receive, the songs that come through us, you know, there is a particular energy. And I want to think that I've seen it, you know, I want to like imagine that from what I've seen in art, like, okay, I could see that, I could feel that. But some people claim to like really have said in their visions that she does present herself saying like, this is me, like, you know.
Interesting.
Yeah, very.
It'd be so interesting from, any number of perspectives to have a deeper understanding of what that is. You know, neuroscience has given us some really interesting looks as to what is happening in psychedelic states. And we live in a really cool time to, you know, especially around so many things, but like psychedelics in particular. The term psychedelic renaissance gets thrown around a lot. Unfortunately, there's also sort of like the onlining of psychedelic capitalism, and it's a strange part of it, but I suppose it was relatively predictable. But one of the reasons that it's a beautiful time to be seeing a sort of psychedelic renaissance is that our understanding of neuroscience is obviously better than it's ever been. So from a hemispheric point of view, we understand that, and I'm going to apologize to any neuroscientists out there because I'm going to butcher this data, but I'm going to do my best. Apparently, psychedelics, plant medicine, have a capacity to hemispherically block left hemisphere function for short periods of time. So our ability to hyperfocus on one thing is sort of a hard-won evolutionary trait, and it's very valuable for any number of reasons, right? The analytical, we can get into one thing and dive deeply into the one thing and not see everything else around us. Apparently with psychedelics, it broadens the perspective of our right hemisphere function, and it just opens up the window and it lets all kinds of light in that otherwise the only other comparable experience would be in dream time. Yeah. Or perhaps in a psychotic break, who knows? You know what I mean? But what's up, cat? There's a really interesting scientist named Sir Ian McGilchrist, who I'm just reading his work now, but he does these exhaustive studies on these things, on hemispheric brain science. And psychedelics is one of the areas that he talks about. So.
Any ones in particular?
There's a book, his most recent book is called The Matter with Things, and it's like I think it's a 3-volume book, but he has a book that predates that one that I'm spacing on the name of, but I can reference it to you.
I meant psychedelics, but books are good.
Oh. So psychedelics, how?
Which ones in particular?
Oh, they're...
All, or are there some in particular that are...
Psilocybin, MDMA, ayahuasca, yeah, those in particular.
The main
I think
ones,
that's what they're referring to.
What are your thoughts on ketamine?
My one experience with it was very interesting.
You enjoy it?
I did. I didn't think I had what you could consider a psychedelic experience. It was medically prescribed.
Okay.
and I was in a controlled environment, and I just felt just sort of lovely for about 2 hours.
Okay.
So I don't have any problem with it.
That's nice.
Yeah, it was lovely.
Do you have any views or opinions on clinical use of ketamine and all these, psychedelic drugs that are now being prescribed?
I can't speak as much to ketamine, but I think that the idea of psychedelic assisted therapy is something that's potentially profound. One of the reasons that, to me, it's fascinating that like something like ayahuasca, which wouldn't normally occur here just because of certain botanical limitations, of Southern California. We wouldn't, but we see it here, and it's become massively popular here, of all, Los Angeles. Why Los Angeles?
Everywhere. Well, because it's a spiritual mecca. There's a lot.
That's true.
Yeah.
But it's also, like, culturally, it's so fucked up here. Like, it's a wonderful place.
That's why we need it.
That's my point. Is it's interesting how these compounds show up almost like avatars as to where they're needed the most. Yeah. And Los Angeles needs spiritual help.
And everybody loves prescriptions.
Yeah.
So why not? Yeah.
But yeah, as far as like psychedelic assisted therapy, I think under the right circumstances, it can be profound. Incubus has a nonprofit called the Make Yourself Foundation. We started it in 2003, but we've been very recently, one of the most recent grants we did was to Heroic Hearts, who are working with MAPS, doing psychedelic assisted therapy to veterans.
That's powerful.
Yeah, and their success rate is, it's amazing. It's amazing to witness something like that. So for PTSD, for trauma, for anxiety around terminal illness, these things are potentially incredible. Yeah,
I agree. I think when it's used in that way, in that manner, to treat specific symptoms, it's a beautiful thing. There's a lot of people who also just love trying new things. Absolutely. And doing things ritually because they enjoy the feeling, So that's where I asked the question of like, what are your thoughts on like the politics or like the future, I guess, of where this could be going? Could you imagine like getting a prescription for ayahuasca? Like, I think you need more.
Right.
I don't know where it's moving, but I think this is a great time to just pay attention, and Absolutely. To just notice, how the people around you perhaps are changing, healing their lives, things, what are they doing in their lives? What are they doing to overcome their own personal trauma, and is it really helping, or is this just another thing, that people are kind of getting hooked into because it's cool, because it's trending, because it's accessible, Yeah.
This is where I would recommend a relative caution or a base layer of respect as the potential that these compounds carry with them. Like we've been saying, there's the potential for it to break you open in ways that you never even conceived of. It has the potential to do so many incredible things to your mental health for long periods of time in one experience. I would argue that most people have positive experiences with these compounds. There are very specific sort of subgroups of people who are everywhere, and there are enough people that are on that kind of spectrum of there's latent schizophrenia or schizophrenia that should not mess with these compounds because they can tip you off in directions that are at the very least unpredictable. You know what I mean? And I'm sure growing up around these things, you've seen enough people that had experiences that tipped them off in the wrong direction. So it's like, educate yourself. I think one of the most important things that we could teach to people who are like coming online with these things right now is set and setting. Make sure you check your intentions as you're coming into it, and then make sure you're in a place that you're safe. You have a backup plan. You know what I mean? Just be smart about it. Don't take acid and go to school. That's stupid. And it's a waste of a high. Unless your school is in the forest and Gandalf is your teacher, then maybe take acid and go to school. Wouldn't that be cool?
It's so funny. Some of these I wrote like, any songs you wrote while high. That's so funny. I'm not going to ask that.
Yes. That's the answer.
Which ones?
I don't know if I could even.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are songs, actually, I should say, in reference to that loose question. I don't know if that was a real question, but.
Well, I put it here.
There are songs that were at least lyrical attempts to unpack the experiences, for sure. Yeah. And I think once just saying that would, if people are like into our band Incubus, they could probably figure out which ones they were.
Yeah, if they're deep listeners in that way.
Yeah.
I noticed today, I'm going to share now. I noticed today I listened to a little bit of one of the songs, and it had a completely different meaning to me just this morning than it did maybe at 17,
What
18.
song is it?
Wish You Were Here.
Oh, right. Okay.
And it's such a common, just this feeling of like, oh yeah, it's such a nice feeling to just like wish someone was there with you and have this experience. But just listening to some of the lyrics and actually envisioning you doing the things that you're describing in the song, and seeing myself as you in it. It was just like, wow, I'm having an entirely different experience. I remember the first time I heard it, maybe, and it's just like, you're listening to melody and everything. And now because of how much we're evolving as people and healing ourselves and kind of clearing the clutter and getting to the core of who we really are, down to that place. It's like music has a completely different meaning, and that's what I loved about it. I just want to share that. Yeah, I just really enjoyed it, where I was like, oh wow, I really just like see the spiritual meaning behind this, whether you intended to write it in that way or not.
That's what's so cool. I mean, among other things, it's so cool about music as an art form is that we can have that experience where you're singing a lyric or singing a song that someone that you might not even know wrote a long time ago, and you can put yourself in that place. And sometimes it fits in just perfectly, like the shoe belonged to you that you put on, and you're like, how's that even possible? But it is music. Highly possible.
That's why I love it so much.
Yeah.
And for people who don't have access to that level of creativity, to know how to write and to be able to sing and express themselves, I think that is it. It's like they become, that part, they relate so much with what you're saying that like they become you for a moment. It is weird, but it's very cool. And I think we've all had that experience. So what music turns you on the most?
I listen to, I suppose it's sort of a boring answer, I listen to all kinds of music. Like my taste in music at home, when I'm just at my house doing normal at-home things, is very different than my taste in music when I'm driving in Los Angeles.
Well, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That lights you up and helps you remember who you are.
Yeah, okay.
Who inspired you, kind of like your favorite artist?
Sure, okay, yeah. I suppose I was very lucky to be 15 years old in 1991, because there was in my opinion, still to this day, there's music that's just still incredible. So the bands and the musicians that made us want to be in a band, we were talking about it earlier, like Bjork was a huge inspiration to Michael and I. We just didn't know you could do stuff like that with sound before we heard her. And then I remember hearing, we got, collectively as a band, we got obsessed with Primus. And we were obsessed also with the band Fish. And we also grew up like going to Grateful Dead concerts. And then when Jerry passed away, we started going to more Fish concerts because it was a huge transplant of like the same audience. And so there was like a community of people. But we were also listening to like Slayer and Mr. Bungle and the weirdest sort of like avant-garde art hardcore we could find. So it was like all over the place. But all of those things made us want to make music, among other bands. But today, when I'm at home, I almost exclusively listen to Hindustani music. I'm a huge fan of like Indian classical and Pakistani devotional music. They're some of the craziest singers and musicians I've ever heard. To me, it's like India and Pakistan, though they're completely different countries, there's a kind of music that comes out that is the equivalent of like metal here, with the level of technicality and level of musicianship and like precision that they get. It just happens to have like this weird spiritual bent, and they're actually singing like hymns to God.
Oh yeah.
Or in metal tradition, it's more like songs for Satan, but it's like, there's not much of a difference. Yeah. So, but when I get in my car and I'm driving, and especially if I'm by myself, I like listening to like really violent, hardcore, like crazy metal music.
Really?
So and everything in between happens. So it's funny because the music that Incubus ends up writing is a little all over the place, but it has roots, I think, in kind of like rock and roll and like an alternative bent. But we also, we were listening to Fish and the Grateful Dead as well as Bjork, but then we were hearing our parents' music, which was the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and all of these. It all made its way in, and it continues to. Yeah. What about you?
Fela Kuti.
Yes.
Lauryn Hill.
Love it.
Erykah Badu.
She smells great too.
Bob Marley.
Fela Kuti is so wild.
He's the best.
It's so, have you seen that doc on him?
Of course,
Yeah.
I've seen it all. I'm such a huge fan, and it's kind of like low key, but also like, it's just, I don't know. And there's so much music, and the songs are so long, and it's just, and I don't know what he's saying half the time until I look it up, but I feel it.
Can I tell you something?
Yes.
I started like looking for old footage of Fela Kuti and seeing him just perform in Speedos with his saxophone. It's like, I'm fucking up, man. Like I
With
take
a cigarette.
Yeah, I don't know how people smoke and
All the
sing.
time. Never leave his mouth, just.
Yeah. I'm feeling the Speedo vibe. I've been taking my shirt off for years. I grew up surfing. Like I just don't like wearing a shirt, but I've been working on trying to pull off the Speedo thing for a long time because of Fela Kuti. So I'm hoping.
Do it this year.
I'm hoping I can get to there. I don't want to deter people from coming to our concerts. You know?
What are you talking about? It'll fill up. People will be like, wow.
For all the wrong reasons.
Have you seen the new thing?
Yeah.
What are you looking forward to most on this tour?
Oh, that's a great question. I could go 100 different directions with that. We're playing with a new musician right now. We're playing with a girl named Nicole Rowe. She's playing bass in the band. And we just did our first 3 shows with her this past week. And she's doing an amazing job. She showed up and really did her homework, and she like knew some of our songs better than we did. She's like, are you sure that's how that goes? We were like, yeah. She's like, I don't think so. And she was right.
I've had that moment too. You're like, wait a second.
Yeah. There's a funny thing though. So it's gonna be really fun continuing to sort of play with her and have that sort of fresh energy. Feels like an aside, but I'm going to get to the point of it as quickly as I can. I broke my nose twice growing up for stupid reasons. Once was on stage at the Whiskey A Go-Go. I caught the headstock of a bass guitar in my face, and it broke this part of my nose, or like cracked open, and it knocked me out on stage. And I woke up to like the stage rumbling, and our old bass player, who unfortunately had knocked me, was kicking me, going, get up, get up. And so I got up and real dizzy and like bleeding out of my face, like finished the set. And just did one of those butterfly things I didn't go to the emergency room or anything, but I broke it there. And then when I was in 7th grade, my nose was broken by an egg that was thrown at my face, and it broke it like properly.
Boiled?
I don't know. There's just blood everywhere. Don't break your nose. It sucks. I'm pointing to this camera like it's everyone. You guys hear that? Don't break your nose. It sucks. Anyway, so I grew up with a severely deviated septum, and I learned how to sing on one nostril. I could never breathe out of the other side. There was no airflow.
Fascinating. Okay.
So that's how I learned how to sing. So as we age, as you know, our ears and our noses never stop growing. So if your septum is deviated, it continues to deviate and deviate and deviate. So breathing gets harder and harder. So I got to a point where I sang on it as long as I could, because I was not looking forward to the surgery that needs to be done to fix it. But I went through like almost 7 years of like, I felt like I was losing my voice, because it was harder and harder to just like take the heroic breath that it needs every couple of seconds. And I was becoming a mouth breather, which isn't a good look for anybody. So in 2019, December of 2019, I had my septum repaired.
Okay.
And somebody pulled a switch somewhere and turned off the whole world for 2 years while I was recovering. So I got this strange, fortuitous, like there was a lot that went wrong during the COVID era. That's a whole other conversation. But to have 2 years to allow for the inside of my face to repair, and then to relearn how to sing, because that's what has to happen.
Oh, wow.
So I had this weird opportunity 30 years into my career to learn how to sing over again. So what I'm looking forward to the most on this tour, and what I've been experiencing over this first just handful of shows this year that we've done, is I can breathe. And I'm finding places in my voice that probably would have been there had I not grown up with a twice broken nose, you know? And so it's really exciting to be feeling that, especially like now almost 33 years into being in a band, to like find new pathways in my face and the sort of the things that it does to your brain and what it's doing to the music and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's really fun.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's
Sorry,
pretty
that
cool.
was a long story.
I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.
I really am. It's like a new freedom.
Really, breathing is awesome.
It's everything. It is everything.
Yeah.
And actually people don't realize how important it is with singing. That's not something I was taught. You just kind of like go for it. But I'm all about those deep inhales through the nose.
Yeah.
Right?
It's right there with presence, like being connected to your breath, you know?
You forget. We forget to
Yeah.
breathe. We forget to be present. Thanks for being present with me today.
Thank you.
I have one more question.
Okay.
If you had 1 minute to speak to the world about anything, what would you say?
I'd probably tell a fart joke.
Be serious.
I don't know, I feel like the world is serious enough. And going back to this whole idea that God is everywhere, God is in everything.
There it is.
There's no such thing as not God, even the lowest lows and the highest highs. I think that us attaching any kind of a significance to the highest highs or the lowest lows beyond a certain point is a fool's errand. I think that God is everywhere. God is in the details. And maybe that's what I would say. It's don't attach so much to when something goes wrong or when something goes right. Just observe it. Just watch. And watch what happens inside of you as you're observing what's going so right or what's going so wrong and everything in between. You know? That's, to me, that's where life gets really, really exciting and really beautiful, because it, like we were saying before, it opens you up to the possibility of recognition of the miraculousness of everything. You start paying attention to all of the things that don't mean anything to most people, but God is in all of those things.
And life gets better.
Yeah.
In that moment. Yay.
So I suppose that's what I would say. And tinge it with a fart joke. Or just fart after you say all that. Just like, thank you.
Cut. So good.
I wish I could conjure a fart right there, because I would. Yeah, I know exactly. Never trust a fart. Yeah.
Oh, you know what they say? Actually, this is a real joke. Never trust an ayahuasca fart.
I believe that.
And you have to wear white.
Yes. That is good advice.
I've had my white robe and I've had it all on there. I've dripped the aya down there, stain.
Yeah.
I've bled on it. I've spilled.
Maybe no onesies.
No onesies. No onesies in ceremonies. No onesies in ceremonies or on planes. Oh my God. Thank you so much for coming to speak with me today.
Pleasure,
and share
anytime.
from your heart and share your life experience with us.
I hope we covered some of the things that you were hoping to
You did.
cover.
And more.
Right.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you too.